Silent prayer is a break in our services. It gives us a chance to dive into our own needs and make our own prayers among all the ones that are done for us. It lifts us up and helps us release any pain and stress of the week, and it helps keep us in the mood of Shabbat as a time of quiet, calm, and hope. After we have silent prayer, we often sing. And we sing to break the reverie and create a new rhythm. Silent prayer and song are different kinds of guides in the darkness. You can think of it like a candle. As the room becomes darker, the tiny light of the candle will become brighter and more significant, just like hope. Prayer, song, and light, these are things we turn to in times of difficulty or darkness. They pull us into another aura, but we need both sides to have either one of them. We hold on to each one as we hold on to hope in harsh times. And these guides become very meaningful and powerful when we are in the middle of a crisis. My time in Israel attempted to show how Israelis are holding on to hope in the midst of their current crisis. The places we visited demonstrated how hope and resilience are one and the same. As we walked the streets, it was hard to remember sometimes that there was a war occurring. It was a very delicate moment to visit. There was a ceasefire and hostages were being released, but yet there was also children playing, families were on picnics, people were surfing in Tel Aviv, people were traveling and going to work and synagogue, as if nothing else was going on. And yet there are still people fighting in some areas, fighting to hold on to their hope. And then we might turn a corner and see a lot of flags, protesters, and messages of support. We would see images of hostages yearning to be returned, yellow ribbons adorning every single streetlight, and people coming together to sing and usher in something different and better than the last week. We met this chef, Nassimi, who I mentioned in a bulletin, and he told us that when people were displaced, the others immediately called and hugged and reached out, and that immediacy, that gave him hope. The people have given him hope. The courage they've had and the togetherness that they've had have given him hope. I met a conversion student who said, after the war started, I felt the strength between the Jews in Israel, and I wanted to be part of that strength. And I could feel all of that strength in my time in Israel. We visited the place where the Nova Festival occurred, and it was covered in memorials for those murdered and taken captive. There were candles, stones, flowers, chairs, and pictures to carry out their legacies. And there had been a tree planted for each person who was killed or taken hostage. Their families had put new life back into Nova. There was new growth growing over the wounds. We also visited many kibbutzim that were destroyed by Hamas on October 7th. These kibbutz inhabitants had stayed in their shelters for over 30 hours, and they would hold on to the door as Hamas tried to run it down, and then Hamas would set fire to the buildings, and they would put the babies on the windows to have fresh air as the whole shelter was enveloped in smoke. And 18 months later, someone has painted the water tower of those same kibbutzim with the words, "The desert will bloom new flowers." And as we were visiting, red flowers and almond trees were indeed blooming. People came for picnics to see the flowers, and these flowers coming in were messages of hope, trying to peek in. These instances of hope don't mean that the people are over what happened. Definitely not over what happened. For example, many people don't want to attach the year 2023 to the date October 7th, because giving it the year would then define it and make it be like they had moved on. People are only moving forward because they have to. Life is still going on, and that was the hope that we found. It wasn't very explicit, but it stood out in the darkness and it broke the silence. Each instance of growth was a symbol of hope, trying to influence the surrounding sadness. Judaism asks us to live in a constant reality of doubt. Think of our history. We have slavery, pogroms, expulsion, concentration camps, etc. And we move from uncertainty to uncertainty, but each time we look forward. Viktor Frankl wrote of how he found hope even in his concentration camps. This is the unfortunate theme of our people. And we see it in this week's Torah portion. The Israelites were part of a terrible world, being slaves to the Egyptians for many generations, and they were convinced that God was hiding. But then God made miracles for them to discover and to see God. And their hope grew with each plague, display of power, and they began to trust in God and Moses. And they were able to release themselves in song and in joy as they crossed the sea. And we were seeing that indeed there are moments of grace and mercy present in our world. Modern Israelis don't want to let the tragedies of October 7th drive their vision. There was a vision for the country before October 7th, and they want to continue to look to the future. After a tragedy, it can be hard to form words. Physical trauma destroys our language. You might feel like you're speechless or in shock. And so now they're trying to create a new story with new language for Israel. And we know that human progress, this new story, is going to be driven by hope. In times of war, we know it's better to hold on to certainty and hope. When the Israelites crossed the sea, Moses and Miriam led them in song. Their hope became a reality. The road ahead for them is still long, and for us too, full of difficulty. But in this moment, we can feel relief and a rush of breath and feel that break in our rhythm. We, Jewish people, always have very complicated hope. We know things will get better. That's why we sing and bring others together, just as we are doing this Shabbat. On our last night in Tel Aviv, as I mentioned before, we celebrated Havdalah at what is now called Hostage Square. This is a courtyard of the Tel Aviv Art Museum that they've sort of transformed into a memorial for the hostages. And there are many other people there with us, and we sang together and collected our hope. We lit up the darkness with our braided candle, and we held on to each other as we held on to our hope. And we too can feel that hope in our song and our silent prayer, in the light, and in being together. As we return to our service, I encourage you to hold on to hope and peace, making them your guiding lights in this darkness. Shabbat Shalom.